Hi there, I'm Dave Horton, the creator of Jambonz, the open source self-hosted CPaaS. In the last episode, I showed you how to route calls from your Voxbone account into your Jambonz CPaaS. In this episode, I'm going to show you the reverse, how to send calls from Jambonz out through your Voxbone account. Voxbone has a service called voxout that we're going to use, so let's take a look at how it's done. Now, if we were sending calls to a carrier that was going to whitelist our IP, such that it would accept any invites that we send from that IP address, it would be a simple matter of going into that SIP trunk in our provisioning GUI here and add the DNS name or the IP address of the signaling gateway of the carrier that we would be sending calls to, and leave outbound checked to indicate that it's an outbound gateway. And then our calls would by default go through that outbound gateway. However, as I mentioned, Voxbone works a little bit differently. We're going to be able to send from any IP. Our IP is not going to be whitelisted, but instead we'll be using SIP credentials to send them calls. So let's go over to Voxbone and configure things on that side. Logging into the portal, the first thing you want to do is choose a DID or multiple DIDs that you want to use for these outbound calls. Now, when I say we're going to use that DID, what I mean is that it is also part of the authentication. So in order to authenticate an outbound call, we need both the SIP username and password that will be used in the digest challenge, but also the from header or the diversion header needs to have a Voxbone DID. And that Voxbone DID needs to be a DID on your account, obviously, at Voxbone, and that Voxbone DID needs to have voxout enabled. So let's just pick a DID here, click on the voice tab, and make sure that voxout is enabled. We'll apply that and confirm that. So now I've got a DID I'm going to use, and voxout is enabled on it. That's one half of what I need to do. The other thing that I need to do is just configure outbound voice. So go under configure outbound voice, click generate to generate a SIP password that I'm going to be using. I'm only going to see that one time, so I need to copy that, save it off somewhere. Okay, and then click save here, save and continue. So, and it says my SIP credentials have been saved. So now let's create a new application, and this is going to be an application that dials outbound through voxout. So let's just call it voxout. And we'll just give it a path of voxout. Same call status hook as always. So we've got a new application, and let's make it the default application for SIP devices that are calling out for this account. So this account, I've given a SIP realm of jambonz.us. SIP devices can register to it. When they try to make calls, it's going to trigger this new voxout application. Of course, that application doesn't quite exist yet, so let's go build it. Let's go over and create a new flow. As always, we're going to start with a webhook in, end with a webhook out. Going to do a dial, and I'm going to do a function call here as well, which we'll look at in a minute. Let's just wire up the path. Okay, so in the dial, instead of dial type of phone, which would cause the call to look for a SIP trunk with outbound checked and send the call that way, I'm going to send it to a SIP endpoint. And I'm going to have a variable on the message object called SIP URI. That's where I'm going to send it to. Now I got to put in my username and password. The username is my normal login username on the Voxbone portal. The password is that one-time password that I just generated. All right. Now again, I need the from header, the caller ID, to be a valid Voxbone DID. So I'm going to take that DID that I had. Let's check answer on bridge. I don't want to answer the call until the far end answers. So I'm going to be sending to this variable, which I haven't constructed yet, and that's what I'll do in JavaScript in just a second, to a SIP endpoint, or the SIP URI needs to be the SIP endpoint. I'm going to, if challenged, I'm going to use those username and passwords. So let's just save that. Let's come in here to the JavaScript, and let's just create that variable. And it's basically going to be the dial string, excuse me, the dial string, or the dial number that I get from my SIP device, sent to voxout.voxbone.com. Because that's the DNS name that we need to send invites to for Voxout. Again, message.call is an object that's populated with the initial webhook, and it has a bunch of information, including the 2, which is the dialed number. Okay, let's save that and let's deploy that. Now I'm going to dial my cell phone number from here. So +1 508. Hello, hello. Okay, so the call successfully went through voxout. Let's look at one quick variation. Bring up the dial verb again. And on that call, I was using my Voxbone DID as the caller ID. So that's actually what came through. That's what the person would have seen as the calling number. There may be a case, and quite often a case, where you want to present a different number as the caller ID. You're receiving a call from one caller and you want to pass that caller ID on. To do that, as I mentioned, what we can do is add a SIP header down here. So we can add a diversion header with the phone number. So it'll be SIP : phone number at voxbone.com. And up here, we can just use the original caller ID, which again is going to be in message.call.from. So that's an alternative way. I'll try the call again. Now I'm going to see on my phone the actual caller ID that was presented, whatever it was. Hello, hello. Okay. Okay, that's it. That's how jambonz can send calls out through voxout. Okay, that's it. As always, any questions, feel free to comment below or email me directly at daveh@tractio.org. Thanks.